Now tell the audience who you are and what do you like about horror broadly?
My name is John, and I'm the writer, director, producer of the movie. I grew up on horror. I really love it a lot, and I love horror that is, I don't know, ever since Trilogy of Terror, the Karen Black TV thing with the little Zoomy doll, and watching Poltergeist behind my friend's couch when I was a kid I just kind of love horror. So yeah.
Hi, my name is Li Zhen. I am a professor of film studies, and I'm the head of film and digital media at ISU. Why I like horror? I'm actually, this semester I'm teaching horror, so horror is basically one of my research interests. And how I started to enjoy horror, I think I'm originally from China, and horror for a long time was really a taboo subject in China. I think maybe because of we couldn't watch a lot of horror films. That is one reason that I really enjoy watching this genre. I think I'm just going to stop with here.
I'm still not sure why I love horror. It's a continual quest that I go on. There are so many reasons why people love horror. I've actually started studying the psychology of it recently. The thrill is definitely a big part of it, but there are lots of ways to get thrills, right? Action films, all sorts of things, and I don't dig those, right? So there is just something about being scared in a safe way.
I think it's interesting. Well, I resonate with what you were saying, because I grew up in a pretty conservative household, and my parents were pretty conservative, and so we did not watch horror movies. And so I would go to my cousin's house and hear about them. And I had a friend across the street, this kid Josh, in second grade. We'd walk to school, and he'd tell me all about Halloween 2 and stuff. But it's as a second grader, you don't really, you're not really putting all the details together. It doesn't make sense. But I think it just had that appeal. And I don't know, I think sometimes, I was thinking about this the other day, because when, we've lived through some pretty insane times in the last couple of years, and I think sometimes horror is the only thing that kind of makes sense. And it's like an escape, and I think that's why I resonate with the Final Girl character, because with some of the stuff that I went through in my personal life, it was that was the only thing that I kind of resonated with.
Horror is the only thing that makes sense. That should be like a bumper sticker or a T-shirt or something. I think we're trying to trademark it. Yeah. Lee, you mentioned that you teach horror a lot. What are the types of themes you see coming out from your students? Why do your students who take the class, what do they resonate with in the films you teach?
Well, horror is actually probably, I would say, the most popular class that I've been teaching, and it's always easy, immediately get many students sign up for this class. I think one is most students sign up for the class because they enjoy horror. They enjoy the thrill, and they find horror films entertaining. So I think the way I teach horror is I want to let them see there are more than the thrill of in the horror films. And because I think I haven't touched one of the main reasons that I enjoy horror is because I think horror is one of the few genres really touches on some themes that mainstream films will never touch upon. So I like this kind of transgressive aspect of horror. So in a lot of time, I think for theoretical readings, we were talking about people ask the question, why horror? And I was telling the students, I said, when you say why horror, it is too broad and too general. Maybe that question is will not guide you to the correct answer. Try to ask the questions that why this particular horror in this particular time that appeal to the particular audience. So when you ask that question, you can find a lot of things beyond just a thrill. That's the answer to that.
Yeah, 'cause films, right, they're cultural products, right?
Yeah.
They're experienced in a time and a place, but that will also change. So, like, the original Night of the Living Dead, a racial reading of that was not originally intended, but when it came out shortly after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, that's the way the culture experienced it, right?
Yeah.
And going forward, different generations will experience it from their own perspective. So there's a timelessness and a timed aspect, if that makes sense, to these products.
Yeah, to that, I always was struck by Night of the Living Dead with Dwayne Jones, because like at the height of the civil rights movement in '68, you have George Romero getting white audiences to root for a black hero who smacks a white woman in the movie, who shoots a white guy in the basement. It's pretty groundbreaking in a way, and it kind of reminds me a bit of like how, Gene Roddenberry would use like Star Trek to get people to empathize with like, oh, why doesn't the Green Planet people get along with Red Planet people? But it's like hoping that they reflect on that in their own way. But yeah, no, I think that's interesting, and yeah, and then now to think about like with a lot of horror movies deal with trauma now too, like that's kind of a big thing in the last couple of years too. So no, it's just reflects it. I don't know.
Well, actually, that was a great segue, because that was one of my questions for you. I know you've discussed how the concept of trauma and not just the experience of trauma, but navigating trauma, becoming a survivor, rewriting one's own story, in a sense. That was a big narrative hook for you. So can you talk a little bit about why you feel that a horror narrative was one in which you could sort of embed that core?
Sure. Yeah. So I based a lot of the film on some personal experiences I went through. I was in a pretty abusive relationship with someone who ended up being like a sociopath, and so then I developed PTSD from that, and it was a pretty terrifying experience. Lots of gaslighting and emotional abuse and manipulation, triangulation, and then sometimes I became this person's boogeyman through a lot of their narratives that they would make about me. And so I decided, well, I want to tell a film, and I feel like you only have one shot at a first film, and sometimes you only have one shot at making a film. And so I wanted to, I related so much to The Final Girl because I felt like sometimes when you go through things like that, it's hard to relate to other people about things you went through, And so I kept seeing this, and I was like, well, I just kept relating to like Sydney from Scream, or Nancy from Nightmare on Elm Street, and just seeing like the strength that they had in there, and the fact that they would fight back, was pretty awesome, because when you're in those kinds of situations, sometimes it's so bleak and so like terrifying, and so to find some strength in yourself to survive that kind of thing, and not just to survive, but to kind of win against that person trying to destroy you. And so that was interesting because you're also making a horror movie. And then what I found with slasher films is there's like such an expectation of like, there's no sex in it, or oh, there's not enough gore. And so, but it was never my intention to do that, because one, there's like, I think for modern audiences, I don't really want to go to like, I need to show some naked woman in this film. It doesn't make sense to me. And I think back to like movies like The Burning, where you have Harvey Weinstein being a creep on that film, and the camera lingering. It's just kind of, it's not, I feel like when I look back at a lot of the 80s slashers that I was basing this film on, all I saw was a lot of misogyny. And I was like, I think that we should do this in a way that revisits that gives like the Final Girl character a film that has, I don't know, it's just a different take on it, But, and then someone else was saying like, well, there was no like part where they give away their grand plan. I'm like, well, that's because that would never happen in real life. Real life is not like Scream, where Billy's telling everybody about his grand plan, and then Stu's like, oh, peer pressure. Real life is like, someone is gonna, like when you're dealing with someone like that, like with the Linnea Crew character, they will hold on to that forever. They will never tell that, they'll never give an inch in terms of they will just gaslight you to the end. And so that was why when we were talking about that scene, she's like, why are you doing this? I'm like, I'm not doing this, you're doing this. Because that's what I experienced was, you want a moment of grace and it never comes. And so I felt like, and the funniest thing for me was when she shoots Mike in the head, was was that it was because she was interrupted, I mean, and to kind of get to the psychology of someone like that, you realize that, and it's a hard thing to realize, that you are basically a pawn for their narrative. You are not a real person. And so that's why I felt like, even Mike is kind of, like I set him up as a bit of a narcissist. And there's some clues in the film that he's kind of a narcissist or whatever. But like, she shoots him in the head basically because he interrupted her grandstanding thing. So I thought that was kind of funny.
And I was catching little bits of that. Did you do a lot of reading on the dark triad, or what they now call the dark quad?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've lived that with somebody for like, I was with this person for like about a year, and then I took 2 years to kind of escape that person. And that's why I wanted to kind of talk to, and I taught kids with a lot of trauma. I taught kids in middle school with emotional disabilities, and they all had PTSD. And I wanted to show the different phases of that. So like, this film to me was about fight or flight, which is, Lexi is kind of in that. When you have PTSD and you're in that trauma space, you kind of get this tunnel vision where everything kind of closes in around you, and you don't really even see the person to your, next to you sometimes. And so for Lexi, I felt like she represented fight or flight. She represented kind of like where I was coming at. And Warren Copper was kind of more like, represents like where I am now, where like, you still have your days where you gotta get triggered, but for the most part, you've kind of seen things. And so I thought it'd be interesting for the two of those characters to kind of have that moment at the end of the film. And also because PTSD can look very different to some people. So I think for people that don't have that, if you see somebody in that tunnel vision, it can look a little like creepy. And so I thought it'd be interesting to build this thing where people who didn't know Warren Copper, didn't know he was in Vietnam, all this stuff, didn't know he had PTSD, might see him kind of alone by himself sometimes. Mm-hmm. There's something weird about that guy. Mm-hmm. And kind of building your own narratives. And so yeah, anyway, I'm just rambling.
We'll come back to that. So one thing I did want to, for the audience, for people who don't know, the sort of terms you were throwing around, dark triad, dark quad, there's some researchers, in particular personality, who are interested in we might call the dark side of personality. And so there's narcissism, which is largely driven by this, overinflated self-entitlement. There's Machiavellianism, using people as pawns, which you mentioned. There's psychopathy, which is largely driven by a lack of empathy, right? And the one they just added recently is sadism, because you could have the other three and still not like to hurt people, right? So when we think about horror villains that are non-supernatural, we might think about putting them in this personality space. And certainly, where I become both fascinated as a psychologist, but also very terrified with some of these characters is, if you're not on these high levels of these traits, it doesn't make sense, right? So
that's why I like, for example, there's some scenes where someone was saying like, what is this, a film for ants? Because they couldn't see, like, because I didn't want to go into a close-up sometimes. And the intention with that was I wanted the audience, like the part when Mike kills the sheriff. And then he instantly turns to like gaslight Lexi, like he's the killer, Lexi, he's the killer. I left it on her wide because I wanted it to be where you as the audience have just seen this happen. And there's no denying that because you see Mike in the shot with stabbing him to death. And I wanted everybody to see that and to not have anything where we're like, well, maybe I didn't see that, And so that was kind of intention there, was to never cut into the violence, because people are like, oh, I want to see the gore and stuff. I wanted to see the shock of that, because the shock is one, the killing him, but the bigger shock is when he turns to Lexi, he's like, he's the killer, and like, what are you talking about? Like, this is crazy, And when we were shooting that scene, everybody's like, oh, this is really creepy, and the way he was going to the truck to say, like, he's the killer. I just remember everybody in the set's like, wow, this is really kind of disturbing. Or even, we were in the pool, actually, and Joy did an amazing job as the killer. we talked a bit about narcissistic people too, and with our own stuff, and just the way that, you know, to the sadism, it's like, it's not enough to just pin everything on this poor girl, but also like drown her and then make her blow, you know. So that was it was a dark place to kind of film that scene, I guess.
Lee, some of the things that John is touching on here, we might think of different ways of horrifying people, right? There's gore is one way that you can, you know, scare people in these narratives, but also there's this idea of unsettling people psychologically. So when you're teaching and writing on these different ways of scaring people, how do you see them working together?
Instead of this question, I would really want to ask John. I would just have a question like Bernie to ask is, actually John already addressed it. When I was watching it, so I was just thinking, before even I started watching this film, because I know it's just the title last summer, you already know it's a slasher genre. So we all know like a slasher genre was, the peak time was 1980s, right? The Friday 13 and Nightmare on Elm Street, that all came around that time. And then the 1990s, there was the revival of the slasher genre with Scream and the following sequels. And then it kind of died out, and then we have slasher films like Cabin in the Woods, right? That's trying to revive it, and also with a new, continuing the tradition, but also try to bring some new concept to the slasher genre. So I was just thinking about when you decided to make this slasher film, you must be aware like there's over 40 years of the tradition and all those films there. If you are going to make a slasher film, you must aware of the challenge in there and how to make this slasher, your slasher film different, and then to revive again the slasher genre. Right. So you already touched upon that the Final Girl, which is very different from the traditional, because you already mentioned like traditional slasher genres like the Final Girl. It's usually that as a pure, innocent, and there will be no sex involved, in contrast to the other female characters would have a sex relationship. But you clearly that in this film, that sex is basically out of the picture, right? So there's very different from the tradition. But there are other traditions, like they say the Final Girl has to use the weapon, the phallic weapon, to kill the killer, and which is again violated. So I just want to know, like, what's like your when you wrote this film, and what kind of, do you have listed, okay, these are all the traditions, these are what I'm going to just break those traditions. I'm curious about that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny, the final weapon was actually, it's the same like boombox that Johnny Depp was using in like Nightmare on Elm Street, and so I got it on eBay, because I thought, no one's got it yet. I'm like, oh, come on. But it's such a weird Easter egg, so. But I just thought that would be kind of fun, and then the song that's playing was like My Old Band or whatever. But I thought that'd be kind of a cool, fun nod to Nightmare on Elm Street. But yeah, just in terms of traditions, I mean, I think, a lot of the films I feel like is a little bit, I mean, they're all kind of unrealistic, but I mean, if you look at like Jason, he's basically like Jaws in the forest, you know, like an unstoppable force, and so I thought it'd be fun to have a vulnerable killer. So like Mike under the mask gets beaten up and falls down and stuff, and I kind of started thinking, well, this is kind of creepy, because it's like if what's his face, like Ted Bundy had like a mask or something, that's just kind of creepy. But I think just I try to think of it in terms of like, what if you were really in a slasher film? So, and then based on like my experiences working in bars where you see like two guys like, you know, all tough, and they go to fight, and it's like they throw like two punches and the other guy runs away. You know, like it's So I thought Mario, like I thought a lot about the audience, like what would make the audience like laugh or who would they kind of resonate with. So I thought Peter represented me, kind of, because I'm just not, you know, like like hopelessly uncool, like always trying to be cool but never really. And then I thought Mario would be great too as another one who represents the audience, you know. So I thought a lot about the audience, but making it's tough because I really, like as I've gone through this and gone to festivals and reviews, it's like the slash audience is a tough audience because they want their gore, you know, they want all this, I'm like, they didn't have any money, so, you know, but I think my focus was a little different, and so that's what has made it. Sometimes I think that the slasher purists are like, I need my, you know, like Terrifier 2, like I could never make that movie, because I think that, you know, so it's been interesting, but I think just resonating with the final girl and then having the focus be on the survivors and less on the killer, you know, is kind of like what I'm going for. So.
Like I love the point you made, for example, about Mario, was a character that I very much connected with. Because for me, I sort of vacillated between the humor elements, which there was sort of general, just comedic timing, but there was also the sort of knowing wink humor. That, you know, that this is sort of a slasher film being made after decades of that. But then also there was sort of the empathy, the connections that I liked a lot of these characters, and you know, Mario goes to hit him and then misses and then runs, and I'm thinking that would totally be me. You know, he's like, you know, cussing at him as he's running. I'm like, this is an absurd situation. Of course, I would be swearing at him and saying, "Get the F away!" And, because so I really appreciated that, and it made me feel for him all the more.
Yeah. I was kind of, we were sad when he died. So, man, it's kind of the fun. I don't know. He was just, and Miles, who plays Mario, is just an amazing person. I love working with him. So I was just like, damn, we're like, maybe he's still alive, you know, or something. But no, it's But I think to go to horror, another thing I like about it is probably just like the cinematography and like the iconography of, you know, you go back to like Michael Myers and coming out of the dark room behind Jamie Lee Curtis in the, you know, and so I remember we had one moment where it was like we had the full moon that one night, and it's like the killer's standing there and the girl comes up like, what are you, you know, like, what are you know, whatever. I was like, this looks so great. Like I love the cinematography of horror. I think that's the other thing is just, I mean, I've worked on a bunch of dramas, but I feel like if you can get someone looking really cool in a mask, it's pretty fun.
I was struck by that one sort of slightly low-angle scene when he's on the bridge.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that struck me. So, Lee, any other particular visual moments that really grabbed you?
Yeah, that's one moment. There are quite a few moments like I really enjoy, and I really like the pre-credit sequence as well. I find the build-up is very different because before the pre-credit, then it starts with kind of like a traditional scene, like a campfire and tell a story, and then murder happens. And then, but when you jump to 5 years later, and immediately starts with an accident, someone's dead. And so that's kind of surprised me because I was expecting traditional storytelling would be after the 5 years before that's murder, and then it will 5 years later it's going to start with kind of slow pace and introducing the characters, and then to have jump to another intense. So it's kind of intensity followed by intensity. So that's I really like that structure. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, I love like popcorn movies where it's like one thing after another after another. Like we went to go see Raiders of the Lost Ark one time. That's like the ultimate popcorn, you know, like movie. But like you can never go get up to get more popcorn because it's like every 2 minutes you're like, nope, there's something more. And so I always, like I've seen this 1,000 times. I'm always like, just get to the part where the shows up because then I feel good the rest of the movie because it's very, and they always say like, enter late and leave early, like on scenes, and so that was one thing, was like just trying to get straight into the thing, because to go to like 2 slasher films, someone always says that you can tell it's going to be a lousy movie if it starts with like a montage or like a helicopter shot. So like Scream starts like immediately, and then you have like I Know What You Did Last Summer. It's like this like long, drawn out helicopter shot, and you're like, yeah, okay. So, but no, it's just, well, actually, it was funny because we shot this during COVID, and it was before like vaccines were available for kids, and so the first 10 pages of the script were like Lexi and Mike going on this trail with all these kids, and that was where you're going to see Mason being bullied, and then he kind of goes to grab this scarf that these kids were throwing, and it falls off the cliff. He goes to grab it, and then he falls to his death, and so that was going to be that, but we couldn't. I wasn't able to get kids together because of the COVID stuff, and so I was like, well, let's just start it right there because that's a strong enough start, you know. And then I was just get right to the meat of it.
That's fascinating because I spent a lot of the movie trying to figure out like, okay, so what really did happen, right? Because the Mike character, when she comes out, it's like, what'd you tell him? What'd you tell him? Right. And so, Yeah.
It was funny with the opening sequence though, because originally it was going to be like set during like the 4th of July, and there was going to be it's the same thing, it's the same speech, but then he goes off to like help out Warren, who's like setting off some fireworks or something, and basically he's just going to, same thing, you see somebody goes into the darkness and someone comes out and like bashes him over the head, and just you see them in the foreground like beating him while like fireworks are kind of blowing off. And I thought that'd be really cool, but I think we just ended up not having money for that. And then finally I was like, we gotta shoot that scene because we need something. And I was like, all right, so we shot it like in the winter. It was like 10 degrees. And it was snowing the day before. I was like, awesome, blood in the snow. And then all the snow melted, but it was still 10 degrees. So I was like, this is not much fun. But it was really cold. It was really cold, Chad.
Yeah, this movie we shot on the hottest day and the coldest day of the year.
Oh my gosh, it was crazy. So.
I have one question about the casting.
Sure.
Is that like before the production, that's when you wrote the script, did you try to write the characters like as a very diverse kind of group? Okay.
Yeah, because that was one thing I feel like, to go back to like representation in film, I wanted to have like, originally I really wanted to have Lexi be like a black female lead, but I couldn't find anybody, and then I found like who I thought was like, well, I thought she would be great in it, and she had really good chemistry with Mike and then also Peter, and so that was really important. But yeah, I thought it'd be really great because typically it's just that you get like the token black character in the film, and they're like the strong athlete, and so I wanted to have them have vulnerability too. So like Mario, and then also Moose to not always be strong, but like, he like freaks out. And then Ronnie's the one who, because she was like kind of like the medic of the camp, she's like, goes back to her training. And like my dad was a paramedic, and so I based a lot of like what she does on like the stuff that my dad always talked about, which is, we were at some like screening, some guys like, why are they putting saran wrap on them? Like, and I'm like, but if you have like a sucking chest wound, you can actually use like saran wrap to keep it from bleeding out or whatever. So it's just like random things like that were kind of fun. But no, I think representation is really important to me. And also even to like in the early 2000s, you had all the remakes where you just felt like you're watching like models running around in a forest. I don't want to see this, I want to see real people. Because if you go to a horror convention, it's like a wide mix of people. And I feel like they should be able to see themselves on the screen, so that's just me.
I'm so glad to see Moose survived.
Me too. Well, he was originally just going to be, like Moose and Mario were kind of like one character. And then I liked Ricardo so much, the actor who plays Moose. And then I like Miles so much, the actor who plays Mario. I'm like, all right, we're going to split this character in half. One of you has to die, unfortunately, but...
And I love, sort of those moments you have there with the end with the survivors, and literally they're leaning on each other, right? And what we know from the psychology of trauma and how to A lot of people talk about PTSD, but there are some counselors who talk about the concept of post-traumatic growth, right? And so, what are the factors that help people navigate trauma to life? Did you kind of have in mind what would happen to these characters the next day?
Oh yeah, I mean, lots of therapy. But, I don't know, like I just think about like my kind of distance from a lot of the things I went through, and it's all steps, it's never easy. And so I felt like, well, Lexi's gonna have a long time because she already has that trauma from her past, and she's still gonna think, even after the fact, that it's her fault that Mason died. And then she just went through this terrifying experience. So I think, to speak to the trauma bond, that was something I really thought about too, was like, originally at the end of it, I was going to have it where there's like this chance of like romantic relationship between Lexi and Peter, but I just felt like it was wrong, because I think it just, when he looks at her at the end and she looks at him, like, I wanted that moment to like linger, like, what is she going to say? Is she going to say, I love you, or da da da? I'm like, no. I think that's the moment where they actually respect each other and they see each other as real people and as survivors, and not just, oh, this girl I'm on a date or whatever, And so I thought that was really important, because I was going to have her, maybe they were going to kiss or hold their hands, but I just felt like, no, that just didn't feel right. I wanted them to recognize each other. And then Moose was in it, but then like when we reshot the ending, he couldn't come down, so so that's why I threw that line out. Because originally, like I had to look, because we were shooting during COVID, I couldn't get a hospital location, so I found one location on 2 floors. So I basically made, every time you see Warren, it's like this other location on the 2nd floor where I like brought all those mattresses and stuff upstairs, and then there was like downstairs was like this hallway with a door on it that looked kind of like a hospital, and finally we got a better lot. It was insane. It was crazy. And then they gave me like 45 minutes to shoot 5 pages. I'm like, okay. So it was nuts. But sorry. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, yeah. Lee, did you have another? I can contribute the audience.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can chat all evening, but if you have some questions for us to chew on, feel free to throw them out.
I'm curious, John, the sort of process that you went through making your first feature, right? This was your first feature.
Yeah.
I know that having gone through that myself, there's so many things that you learn going through that process that you think about how you might want to improve for the next film or do differently for the next film. Do you have something that is like the #1 thing, that you took away from shooting the film that was like a big learning experience for you?
Oh yeah. It was funny because it was actually the first day, the first night that we did our first night lighting. I realized just how ambitious this was. It was way bigger than I thought it was going to be. Because I think, oh, 1 location, how hard is that? But then you think your 1 location is a giant camp. And you're doing night lighting. And then you realize, oh, I'm also making an action movie. I didn't realize that. That's insane. So, so then all the visual storytelling elements count, like all the pickups, the inserts, everything, like all that stuff. But then you're also like running the thing. So you got like da-da-da-da-da, and you're under all stress. So I think the biggest thing for me was just understanding how stress, like to go back to what we talked about earlier, it was like how much stress impacts you and how your stress impacts everybody else. And I think just technically, I would shoot with cinema zooms because I used like anamorphic lenses, and those are decent at f4, but when we're shooting at night, we're down at like a 2.8, so everything's much softer, which strangely lended itself to the 80s look, because if you look at 80s movies, they're like very soft compared to modern films, which are like super clinical. And the first, like our world premiere, we played with this other, I was like, thanks for putting us against another summer camp slasher film. It's like, great, but, and ours was like much more to the 80s aesthetic. And everybody's like, it's out of focus. I'm like, well, it looks like an 80s film. Like, and the other one was like clinically sharp. It was like all like Zeiss primes and stuff. You're like, great, cool. But no, I think just I don't know. It was tough. I mean, it was a really hard shoot. It was night first exteriors. I think realizing you're never gonna have enough time, And so finding ways to kind of help yourself out. Like I would make lighting diagrams to give to the crew, and so we knew where to set up our stuff, but that still was never enough. And we shot the bulk of it in like probably 12 days, I think, or something. 12 days maybe? Yeah, which is insane for, like, you know, basically we're shooting like an 1986 studio film in the forest with no money in 12 days. With basically all of us were like green crew. I think I was the only one who had ever been on an actual, like a feature film before, and everybody else was from our workshop, and, or we, you know, worked on commercial shoots and stuff. But I don't know. It's just as much prep as you can possibly do, is what I would say, and then shoot with cinema zooms instead of primes. Because the ending of it, we used this Ingenue Easy 3090. And we could just stealing shots all day long, like boom, 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 let's get that one, insert, da, 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 da. They have to do lens swaps. I mean, we knocked out a ton of stuff that day. And anyway, I could go on forever about that. And, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, it seems to me like all of you have your different takes on horror and the slasher genre. It also seems like the slasher genre, the subgenre in horror, is possibly the most limited of the subgenres. So why do you think we keep coming back to it?
Because they're fun.
There are 10,728 slasher films out there, and only a handful of them that really stick out.
Yeah.
So why do you think culturally and professionally we keep coming back to it?
I mean, I love them, but that's just me.
Yeah, there's certainly a nostalgia element. I mean, as someone who also grew up in the 80s, that was the first serious subgenre of horror that I got into. One scholar by the name of Vera Ditka described particularly the first cycle of slasher films as a game. I believe her book was called Games of Terror. And at least the way that article came out, or that book came out, was that we all know a lot of these folks are going to die. The game is how they're going to die when, it's almost like a funhouse, right? And so being able to play with audience expectations, giving us what we expect, but not in the way we expect it. The sort of, any type of fresh take is something that is, Ditka would argue that's enjoyable, which I also agree. It's fun to see expectations violated. And I think that that and the fact that, I don't know, a killer in the woods with a knife, you know, like, could very easily happen, right? And so it's pretty easy to wrap your head around that.
I think from a filmmaker standpoint, I think just horror as a genre is a great entry point for new filmmakers. And so there's a low bar for quality and all that kind of stuff. You know, I mean, I've seen Blood Rage and Final Exam is one of my favorite slasher films. That movie's got a, you know, and I think like when I met a lot of other like fans of horror movies at conventions, it's like they love the rough edges, you know, versus like as a new filmmaker, I would not want to make a sci-fi film because you're competing against, you know, $150 million budgets. I mean, that's the one thing that I learned in this one, is that it doesn't matter how much money you did or didn't have, you're playing against movies that have like a $150 million budget or whatever. And so the expectation is the same, and it's kind of tough, but, you know, at the same time, it's like it's a great breeding ground for filmmakers, because you think of all the filmmakers that came out of horror. They wanted to do other things. I mean, Sam Raimi, you know, so I always look at it like, okay, like, lots of rough edges, but, you know, you look at Sam Raimi's Evil Dead, leading to Evil Dead 2, to now, like, you know, all the other stuff he's done, so. Sorry.
That's a great question. I think I have been teaching horror for quite a few years, and it's every time, like, I would ask my students what's their favorite subgenre. Slasher subgenre is always the number one. And it's, my class is usually mixed, like, female and male students, all half and half. They all most of them all enjoy slasher. I think from my understanding from that, the explanation is one of the major reasons is the survival narrative. I think the popularity of the slasher subgenre, it's really rely on the young audience because they really love this genre, and also I think it's because of their experience of like teenager, the experience of they are surviving a lot of things, dealing with a lot of difficulties. So slasher genre kind of provide them with this narrative of survive, like fight and survive. Even though reality is not like in reality, but metaphorically, they kind of can relate to the survivor girl. And particularly, I mean, for the female students, they all talking about the final girl. That's the reason they felt a sense of empowerment watching that. And I think another reason come up is many students play video games now. So a lot of video games is based on the survival kind of narrative. So because of that familiar with the video games, and when they watch the films, they kind of easily to link those two medium together. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to add to that was like just like it's one of the few genres where like the woman is like the lead role, you know, because like in action movies it's usually just like Schwarzenegger or something running around, and so it's kind of cool to have like a, you know, like just when I think about Hollywood and all of the issues there, it's like to have like women leading this film is really awesome. And then, you know, even to consider Hollywood and ageism, you have Jamie Lee Curtis leading this massive like franchise as the face of it for such a long time. I mean, it's really awesome. You know, that's why I love like our film, because I feel like how often do you get this, you know, like I feel like our villain is really awesome and evil and vile and terrible, but you know, it's just really cool to think about, again, going back to representation and everything. And sorry.
Do you think initially when they first started having women be the lead in slasher films, that was an intentional choice to like subvert misogyny and horror, or was that just something that, like kind of Living Dead, was a consequence of like the cultural aspect, like how people viewed the films?
So I was just thinking about like how whether I'm not sure like whether when they create like the slasher at the beginning, like whether they consciously trying to create a film to fight against the misogynist representation. Like Halloween really stands out. I'm also thinking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is another great film. But in terms of comparing like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween, definitely that Halloween provide a stronger and survivor and a fighter, right? And Texas Chainsaw Massacre is basically we watch the female survivor is just how she survived and running, but there is no sense of empowerment. So Halloween, it really came out as kind of really groundbreaking when create the Final Girl. And then I'm kind of consider because of the influence of that film, and then it started with this tradition, and you realized that there was a huge market and for this film, and a lot of the women audience really like. They start to, because slasher film originally it's really kind of considered for male audience, right? And particularly horror at those times is for male audience. But I think Halloween really changed this this whole scenario.
My favorite horror film is Halloween specifically too, and I think it's interesting the main character is in a very maternal role as well, like on top of like fighting for her life, she's also like trying to protect these kids. And I don't know, that has been always an interesting aspect of the movie for me. Having someone who is this badass woman who has to fight through while also still caring for, I think it like is a good juxtaposition for how women navigate society in general. So.
Read like Nancy from like the Nightmare on Elm Street, because she comes up with a plan, gets up, she's very resourceful, she's setting booby traps and all this stuff to get them, she's very brave going into the dream to pull them out. I mean, I think there's a lot that's really cool about it, and I think that was an interesting thing that I saw when I was I watched like 200 slasher films from the 80s to kind of get, okay, I need to get that, and I need to do this, and da 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 da. And there's a lot of misogyny and all that stuff, or like a lot of like, okay, I don't know why she needs to take a shower right now, but apparently that's happening, you know. And it was just the creepiness of I think the producer mindset of like, oh, we need to put some nudity in it to sell or whatever. And sometimes it's pretty obvious, and you're like, this is only for that reason. There's no reason otherwise. And so that was why, with the characters in my film, I always wanted like all of the women to have to not just be like strong badasses like Ripley, but to be complex and you know, like, but even like Ronnie, like risks her, like gives her life to save her friend, you know, and they're always looking out for each other too. Like they literally like pull you know, Kelly on the stretcher, our Weekend at Bernie's guy from the movie, and but they, even in that moment, they were still kind of looking out for each other, and so I thought that was kind of cool versus other films. There's like, you always have the slasher film when they start to fight with each other. You ever seen that one? They start instantly fighting. You're like, why? Unnecessary drama for some reason. I don't know. So.
Well, I think that there are definitely some films where it was intentional, and others that were just happenstance, right? And so, you mentioned Nightmare on Elm Street, and Wes Craven, for example, was trying to be very intentional, and that came, of course, midway through the slasher cycle. There's a really interesting book by, I believe, Noel is the last name, Nowell. The clever title of the book is called Blood Money, and it does a really interesting sort of analysis of not just narrative structure, but also marketing campaigns, and trying to be very mindful about appealing to, you know, lots of different folks in different identity categories, if for no other reason than to get, you know, people to see the film, but for also the desire to get people to connect with these characters as well, because yes, we are going to see some of these set pieces, right, but narratively, we want to be sucked in with the audience, we want to feel for these characters, so.
Any other questions or anything? So, just want to say thank you all for coming out, and you know, it's been crazy to be here, and actually, Jace, and I don't know if anybody who worked on the film, do you want to stand up and say hello? I know that guy. Oh yeah, she's evil. Watch out. She'll get you. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you.
So thanks, Sean. Thanks, Lee. Thanks to the fine folks at Normal Theater. Please do come out and see more films here, not just horror, although obviously we love that. And enjoy the rest of your evening.